The bottom edge of the inner collar stand is attached to the neckline. Match markings, extending the ends of the inner collar, stand past the neckline center front button panels. The bottom edge of the inner collar stand is sewn to the neckline. Use a 1 cm, 3/8 inch seam allowance, removing pins just before entering feed dogs. Sew a little at a time, smoothing out the layers before feeding through the needle. Clip the seam allowances at the curves and iron the seam. Next, top stitch the seam allowances towards the outer collar stand, 1 to 3 millimeters above the seam. Note the collar stand extends beyond the button panels. These extensions are the seam allowance when the inner collar stand is attached. After this, the finished collar stand will be aligned with the button panels. Next, make the collar. The inner collar and collar stand are interfaced. Cut the interfacing for the inner collar and iron it on the inner collar piece, wrong side. Cut the interfacing 4 to 5 millimeters inside the trace lines. Iron the interfacing onto the inner collar. Place the inner and outer collar pieces with right sides together. Sew the short ends and the longest edge in one seam. Turn the corner using one 45-degree angle stitch between the short side edges and long edge. Clip the corners and turn the collar. Push the corners out from the wrong side and finely shape with a straight pin from the right side. Iron the collar seam from the inside. Shape and iron the collar from the outer side, the side without interfacing. Align the collar edges and iron so the outer side edges are just inside the inner collar edges. When worn, the inner collar shows. Trim the bottom edges of the collar. Pin collar to collar stand, aligning front, end markings, and center back marking. Sew the collar to the collar stand, removing pins and flattening the layers little by little. Use a 1 centimeter, 3/8 inch seam allowance. At this point, the outer collar stand and the collar is attached to the neckline. Next, the inner collar stand, it has interfacing, is joined around the end curve, along the top edge, and around the other end curve. This leaves the bottom edge of the inner collar stand to be finished next. Once the bottom edge of the inner collar stand is sewn, the entire collar area's raw edges are concealed inside edge-to-edge finishing. Cut and iron interfacing to the inner collar port. The interfacing is slightly smaller than the fabric. Cut inside the tracing marks, 2 to 3 millimeters. Iron interfacing to the inner collar port. The interfacing is slightly smaller than the fabric. Pin the inner collar stand, aligning with outer collar stand. For sewing this seam, the outer collar stand and collar seam is ditch stitched. This seam continues at both ends, around the curve, ending aligned with button panels. At each end, at the bottom of each end curve, turn up the allowance to match the outer collar stand allowance. Sew from the outer collar port side, starting at the end curve, aligning seam with center front button panel. Ditch stitch along previous seam, then around the other side curve, aligning with the other button panel at the other center front. Clip the curves and turn the collar stand right side out, using a straight pin to form. With the shirt laid out, wrong side up, fold the inner collar stand bottom edge under, aligning it just below the previous top stitching of the inner collar. The previous top stitching will be ditch stitched, so the folded edge is just barely caught in the seam. This final seam, that finishes the collar area, that also encloses all the raw edges, is ditch stitched from the right side, a blind joining of the bottom, folded edge of the inner collar. Top stitch, edge to edge, while removing the pins from the bottom, while sewing, little by little. Here is the finished collar area from the inside and outside of the shirt. Next, Step 7 covers finishing the slits at each cuff area of the sleeves.